Hello and welcome back to Thinking Deliberately. This is episode 9, and today we're going to talk about why leadership styles are nonsense. This maps into a video you can see on YouTube, but it's also part and parcel of my Leading Deliberately book, the third one in this series. So in the last episode, we pulled apart the MBTI, Enneagram, and the comfortable little cages people build around what they call personality. And today we're going to move into leadership. And I want to start with the statement that will probably annoy trainers and consultants and business schools, HR, leadership coaches, and probably half of LinkedIn. Leadership styles are nonsense. Not because leadership doesn't matter, it does, obviously. Not because people do not lead differently, they do. And not because there are no observable patterns in how people behave when they have authority, responsibility, influence, or visibility. There are. But the idea that leadership can be meaningfully understood as a set of fixed styles is one of the great comforting simplifications of organisational life. And here's a list. I'm not going to do too many, but you've got autocratic, democratic, transformational, transactional, servant leader, authentic, coaching, visionary, situational, charismatic. Transformational one is the one that's the issue there, because only about 10% of the actual country are capable of doing it in the first instance, but we'll probably come on to that in a little while. On and on the list goes. A wardrobe of leadership costumes. And the implication is usually this: find your style, develop your style, adapt your style, learn when to use different styles, which kind of negates the whole point of having a style, right? It sounds useful. It sounds practical. It sounds like something you can put into a workshop, a competency framework, or a laminated handout. And that is exactly the problem. It's just too neat. Leadership is not a style. Leadership is a construction. A person does not walk into a room carrying a leadership style like a coat. They construct self, context, and response in the moment. They construct what leadership means, and they construct what the situation requires. And they construct who they are in relation to others. They construct authority, risk, responsibility, power, accountability, care, control, urgency, performance, identity, threat, and possibility. That's a big list. Then they respond. And afterwards, we call the pattern a style, which is kind of backwards when you think about it. The style is not the source. The style is the residue, the outcome. It is the visible trace of a construction that has already happened. And this matters because when we teach leadership styles, we often teach people to imitate the residue rather than understand the construction. We tell them to be more collaborative, more empowering, more authentic or strategic, even more emotionally intelligent. Can you be more visionary, more agile, more whatever word happens to be fashionable this year? But if we do not examine the level of awareness from which the person is constructing leadership, all we have done is give the same self a better costume. A low awareness leader can perform collaboration. They can ask for input while already knowing what they want. They can invite challenge while quietly punishing it. And they can say, "My door is always open," while constructing dissent and disloyalty. They can hold a listening session and still use every comment as evidence that they were right in the first place. And that's not collaboration, it's just theatre. A low awareness leader can perform authenticity. They can overshare, they can tell emotional stories. They can say, "I just want to be real with you." They can confuse being unfiltered with being honest. They can make their feelings the center of the room and call it vulnerability. Not authentic leadership. That is emotional exhibitionism with a job title, which we talked about 2 episodes ago. A low awareness leader can perform servant leadership, which I fundamentally hate. They can say they are here to serve. They can talk about people first, and they can use humility language. They can appear caring, supportive, and available. And underneath, they may still be constructing themselves as morally superior, indispensable, needed, or admired, and quietly in control. That is not servant leadership. That is ego wearing its apron. This is the problem with leadership styles. They describe behavior without necessarily revealing the construction beneath the behavior. And in leadership, the construction beneath the behavior matters far more than the behavior itself, because the same behavior can emerge from the very different levels of awareness. A leader may ask a question. At one level, the question is a trap. At another level, it's a test. At another level, it is a performance of inclusion. And at another level, it's genuine curiosity. Same behavior, different construction, different leadership. A leader may make a fast decision. At one level, the decision comes from impatience and control. At another level, from fear of ambiguity. At another level, from genuine contextual judgment. And finally, from another level, the capacity to hold complexity quickly without collapsing into panic. All again, same behavior, different construction, different leadership. Well, a leader may give autonomy. And at one level, it's avoidance. Another, it's neglect. Another, is trust. Another is deliberate development of the other people's capacity. Same behavior, different construction. That results in a different leadership. I nearly said style, but it's not. This is why leadership styles are too crude. They cannot tell us enough. They do not tell us what the leader is aware of. They don't tell us what the leader is intending, and they don't tell us what the leader is protecting, nor do they tell us what the leader is constructing as a threat. They do not tell us whether the leader can hold multiple perspectives without getting cognitive dissonance. And they don't tell us whether the leader can choose to go beyond ego, fear, image, control, or tribal loyalty. They do not tell us whether the response is deliberate or automatic. And yet organizations keep using these models as if they explain leadership. They do not. They simplify it. And simplification is seductive because leadership is difficult. Leadership is difficult because it's not really about having followers. It's about constructing environments in which people, decisions, relationships, tasks, etc., and futures become more or less possible. And that is far more demanding than having a style. At lower levels of awareness, leadership is often constructed as position. I am the leader because I'm in charge. Authority is the organizing principle. The leader thinks leadership means giving direction, making decisions, holding people accountable, and ensuring compliance. And this may be necessary sometimes, but if this is the only construction available, the leader is not leading complexity. They are managing obedience. At another level, leadership is constructed as relationship. I am the leader because I bring people with me. Now, the leader values engagement, belonging, morale, trust, and the emotional climate. And this can be more sophisticated, but it can also become trapped in approval. The leader may avoid difficult truths because they don't want to damage relationships, or they may confuse harmony with health or challenge as conflict, and they might become dependent on being liked. At another level, leadership is constructed as self-authored direction. I am the leader because I can hold a vision, make difficult decisions, and take responsibility. Now, that looks really strong, and it can create clarity, and it's often taught that way in universities. But it can also challenge groupthink, which is useful. But it can also become ideological. The leader may become too attached to their own map. They may construct disagreement as lack of understanding, or they may confuse conviction with awareness. They may become very good at leading people into the wrong future with impressive confidence. At higher levels of awareness, leadership becomes less about the leader as a person and more about the construction of the whole field. The leader is no longer merely asking, what should I do? They're asking, what is being constructed here? What am I constructing? What are others constructing? What does the system make visible? What does it hide? And what level of awareness is shaping this response? That's the key one. What futures are we making more likely through the way we are thinking now? And that ties in with an article I put on LinkedIn about the future controls your current behavior. Check it out. That is a different order of leadership. It is no longer a leadership as a style. It's leadership as conscious construction. This is where constructive development theory changes the conversation. CDT doesn't ask, what leadership style do you have? It asks, from what level of awareness are you constructing leadership? What are your cognitive intentions doing under pressure? What is your intention in this moment? What are you aware of? What choices are available? What response are you constructing? What environment does your response create? The final question matters, the environment one, because leaders do not merely make decisions, they construct environments. Every response from a leader changes what becomes possible in the room. If a leader responds defensively, they construct caution. If they respond with curiosity, they construct openness. And if they punish challenge, then maybe they construct silence. If they reward compliance, they construct dependency. What if they over control? There's a lot of passivity there. If they avoid decisions, they construct confusion. And if they hold ambiguity well, they construct maturity. If they tell the truth cleanly, maybe then they construct truth. That is leadership. It's not a style. It's a series of constructions that shape what others can safely, intelligently, and developmentally become in that context. And this is why I sometimes think that there's no such thing as a leader in the way people imagine. There is not a magical leadership essence inside someone. There is no permanent leader self glowing away behind the ribs. There is only a person constructing leadership in a given context with a certain level of awareness through certain intentions, habits, assumptions, fears, and capacities. Sometimes they construct it well, sometimes badly. Maybe sometimes they construct authority when the context requires inquiry. But what if they construct collaboration when the context requires clarity? Sometimes they might construct urgency because they cannot tolerate uncertainty. Sometimes they construct patience because they are avoiding responsibility. Maybe they construct empowerment because they genuinely want others to grow. But empowerment, if they're constructing that, then maybe they can't be bothered to lead. So that is why behavior alone is not enough. You have to understand the construction. This is also why copying great leaders is often pointless or meaningless. People love studying great leaders. What do they do? What habits did they have? How did they communicate? What routines did they follow? Which style did they use? This produces endless leadership books, airport bestsellers, keynote speeches, and executive programs. But copying the behavior of a high awareness leader without the awareness that produced it is just impersonation. And I touch on this in the other NLP context, but we'll come on to that. So you can copy calmness without the wisdom, or decisiveness without judgment, humility without self-awareness, vulnerability without depth. And then a really important one, you can copy confidence without the competence. Think about flying a plane. You don't want a confident pilot, you want a competent one. You can copy vision without complexity. Leadership development often fails because it trains behaviors without transforming the awareness that constructs them. It teaches people what to do without developing the person who is doing it. And that is why so many leadership programs are expensive theatre. People go away, they learn a model, they fill in a workbook, practice a conversation, write a reflective action plan, and then return to the same organisation, same pressures, same identity threats, same incentives, same habits. And more importantly, from my perspective, and hopefully yours, the same level of awareness, same level of thinking. And within a week, the old construction is back. But now it has leadership language, and that's not development. That is behavioral cosplay. Real leadership development must increase awareness. It must help people to see the construction behind their response. And it must help them notice how they construct power, how they construct responsibility, authority, competence, even failure, maybe dissent, how they construct other people. Leadership is often most revealing when identity is under pressure. When things are going well, many leaders can look impressive and they can talk about values and teamwork and praise innovation. And they can say they welcome the challenge. They can smile in photographs, but pressure tells the truth. Under pressure, the construction is revealed. In my research, I say that under duress, we regress. And this is what we're talking about. Does the leader become controlling, avoidant, blaming, performative, defensive, heroic, curious, maybe even developmental? That'll be perfect. Pressure shows us the actual level of awareness, not the leadership brand, not the value statement, not the carefully rehearsed answer at that away day they did. The response itself. This is why CDT is ruthless. It does not care what kind of leader you say you are. It looks at what you construct under pressure. That is where the real leadership lives. And this brings us back to styles. A style is too often a retrospective label for repeated construction. If you repeatedly construct leadership as control, people may call you autocratic. If you repeatedly construct leadership as support, people may call you servant-hearted. If you repeatedly construct leadership as inspiration, well, then somebody might call you transformational. But the deeper question remains, why are you constructing leadership that way? What does it protect? What does it avoid? What does it make possible? Or maybe even the opposite. What does it prevent? What level of awareness does it reveal? Until we ask those questions, we are not developing leaders, we are classifying them. And classification is not transformation. A leader does not need to find the correct style. A leader needs to become aware enough to construct the response the context requires. Sometimes that response will be directive. Sometimes it'll be collaborative or silent, and sometimes challenging, maybe even disruptive. And a good one I could learn is patience. Maybe it could be patient. But the quality of leadership is not found in the category of behavior. It's found in the awareness, intention, and choice behind the response. That is the shift from style to construction, from trait to awareness, from performance to developmental capacity, from what kind of leader am I to what kind of leadership am I constructing now? And that question is far more useful. It also removes some of the ego from leadership, because if leadership is constructed, then leadership is not an identity to worship. It's not a personal brand or a heroic self-image, or maybe even it's not even a personality cult. It's not the title of your email signature. Leadership becomes a responsibility in the moment. A responsibility to construct an environment where better thinking, better choices, and better responses become possible. That is much harder than having a style and much less flattering, which is probably why we avoid it. We prefer leadership styles because they are manageable, and we prefer traits because they are marketable. We prefer leadership competencies because they are measurable on forms, box ticking basically. And we prefer leadership brands because they make people feel special. But real leadership is not about feeling special. It's about becoming aware enough that the room does not have to suffer your unconsciousness. And that may be the most practical definition of leadership I can offer. A leader is someone whose level of awareness affects the developmental possibilities of the environment around them. Low awareness narrows the environment. High awareness expands it. Low awareness creates compliance, fear, confusion, dependence, performance, politics, and silence. Higher awareness creates clarity, responsibility, challenge, participation, learning, and choice. That is leadership, not style, construction. So here is the uncomfortable question for this episode. What do people experience when you are under pressure? Not when you are relaxed, not when you're doing the leadership workshop, not when you are posting about values, not when you are being observed under pressure. Just what environment does your response create? Do people become more honest around you, more careful? Do they think better or maybe perform better? Do they challenge you or manage you? Is there any growth in them for them? Or simply learn how to survive your preferences? And that's the test, because your leadership is not what you call yourself. It's what your construction makes possible for others. This is thinking deliberately. And today's uncomfortable thought is this. You may not have a leadership style. You may simply have a repeated construction of self under pressure, and everyone else has been forced to call it leadership. Thank you.